All right, welcome everybody to another Developer Hours session. Today we're going to be talking about metaboxes and alternatives to metaboxes in WordPress. My name is Nick Diego. I'm a full-time sponsor contributor working for Automatic, working on core documentation on the meta team. And I'm joined by my colleague, Ryan Welcher. Ryan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. My name is Ryan Welcher. As Nick said, I am also a sponsored contributor I'm sponsored by Automatic, and working in developer relations, doing a lot of coding. I do live streams, I do videos. You might see me speak at a conference here and there. And I'm excited to be here. We're going to talk about some fun, cool stuff that we can do with UI options for metaboxes.
Yeah. So
That was my
if you
radio
just
voice, by
joined,
the way.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Nick. I was making a bad joke about that being my radio voice while you were speaking, and now the professionality in this call has gone right downhill.
Perfect, perfect. So for those that have just joined us, there's a poll running. We'll run that for a few more minutes. It's just asking you a few questions about your experience with metaboxes. Are you currently using them? That sort of thing. Um, as the poll is currently showing, the majority of folks in the call either create their own metaboxes or use a plugin that introduces metaboxes. If you don't know what a metabox is, you'll see one in a second. But metaboxes have been in WordPress for a really long time. So you probably run into them before if you're using WordPress or some of the popular plugins out there. However, there's some discussion going on around trying to move away from metaboxes. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share the kind of the main issue that's talking about this, and then kind of explain some of the reasons, and then we'll dive into some examples of how you might approach an alternative method of doing the same thing you would do in a metabox, but just in a different way. So I'm going to end the poll because I think most of us have answered. So I'm going to end the poll now. Thank you all for participating. And I'm going to share my screen. All right, I'm going to drop this in the chat, the link. So if anybody wants to check it out, they can go right there. So this pull request is about moving metaboxes to their own section within the editor. There's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, the editor is being iframed, and there's I don't want to get too deep into the technical details, but the fact that the metabox and the editor are rendered together can cause some problems. So moving the metabox into its own place, or metaboxes into their own place, can improve the editor. Also, as we move forward in WordPress, there is work being done to combine, kind of bring together the post editor and the site editor. Currently, metaboxes live in post editor. And so once you kind of merge to get to a point where you're merging the two, it starts to introduce some complexities related to how metaboxes work in those environments. So if metaboxes can be isolated into their own area, then it just improves how the editor functions and all sorts of technical details around that. So part of what we wanted to do today is first elevate and make everyone aware of this PR and the related issue for those who are not aware, and then also talk about like, okay, well, there's one thing about moving metaboxes into this separate area, but then the other question is are there different ways to approach presenting content in the editor that don't use metaboxes at all? Because metaboxes are a bit more of a, I hate to use the word legacy, but as you can see in the title of this PR, it's being used. It's a legacy technology compared to where the editor is heading. So while metaboxes will still be supported in some fashion, it's more about like, how do we look forward to the next 2-3 years around how you want to present content in the editor that don't use metaboxes. So I've said metaboxes about 1 million times. So what is a metabox? So if I have a playground instance here, and you can check this out if you don't want to use a local site yourself, just go to playground.wordpress.net, go into a post, and then all you need to do is open preferences, and you can turn on the custom fields option, and this will present you with a metabox. So this is what a meta box looks like. A lot of plugins create their own meta boxes. They are currently live below post content. This can be a bit of an annoying thing because, especially if you have like a long post, you got to scroll all the way to the bottom to find your custom fields or your post meta or whatever, is being placed in a meta box. And the current proposal is to move meta boxes into their own little section. So you click on a button that says show meta boxes, and then it would open a modal or something. The discussion is ongoing where you'd see your meta boxes separately. So it would not live at the bottom of post content like it does here. So that's what the PR is about. But what Ryan and I wanted to do was to have an open discussion with you all. And we really, big part of this session is to hear your feedback, because a lot of you are using meta boxes or using plugins that use meta boxes. So we're going to present some alternative approaches to how you could do kind of the same thing that you could do with a meta box in a different way in the editor that's more natively built into the editor. But we want to hear from you, like, what roadblocks would this present? Like, okay, that's cool, Nick and Ryan, cool demos, but like, it doesn't support my needs. We want to hear that feedback from you. So feel free to use the chat, because like I said, meta boxes have been in WordPress forever, and moving away from them, we know is going to be a challenge. And so while we think we're presenting some fairly good alternative approaches, likely there's still going to be need some work there. And part of our job is to provide examples for folks who are doing this transition away. So I'm going to start with some really simple examples, and then Ryan's going to get into some more kind of cool stuff. But we have a repository. Let me see if I can. Of course, I don't have it here. Let's go to, it is called, if you go to the block developer example, development examples repositories. Put that in the chat. Actually, Brian, do you mind putting that in the chat? This repository, which is being built out over time, the idea behind it is to include a whole bunch of examples that you as a developer can go in, take a look at how it's done, copy, paste, drop it into your own project, so on and so forth. So we have a few examples in here related to this concept of kind of moving custom fields and post meta out of meta boxes and into a more native editor experience. The first one I want to show you is this one called Plugin Sidebar. It's probably the simplest example that you're going to see today. And the cool thing about this repository is that there's some little links here, and one of them is a WordPress icon. This will open up a WordPress playground link, and it will have the little demo plugin already installed. So you can see my plugin sidebar plugin is installed. And if we go over to posts and go to Hello World. So what this plugin does, and we can take a quick look at the code here. Is it register? Let me zoom in a little bit. It is going to register post meta. So this is something that we've been doing in WordPress forever. And it's in PHP going to register this post meta called sidebar plugin meta block field. Now, instead of this being in that custom fields panel or some other meta box, what we've done is it is now displaying in the we've added a plugin, we've registered a plugin inside of the editor. And if I click on this little icon here, you can see that I have my meta block field. If I click test, update, so on and so forth. If I go to preferences and open back up my meta box, I always click on the wrong thing. We will see that we have that sidebar plugin meta block field, and we have test. So instead of a user coming in here and going down to their meta box and custom fields, they can just open this up and edit their fields directly inside of the editor. Now, the way that this works is using slots and slot fill. So I'm going to drop this link here. There's only a handful of ways to get content into the editor. And we do this using slots. I think there's, 9 or so slots that you can use. And so one of the slots that's being used in this example, we can back out and look at the, I'm not going to go through every line of code because all the code is here in the repository. We're just going to look at the important pieces. But you can see here that we're using this plugin sidebar slot, which is one of the slots that's available. So if you go to the slot fill reference, you can go down to the plugin sidebar and learn about how the plugin sidebar slot works. And what that's doing is, if we go back to our example here, it is registering a plugin. So if you look at the code, sorry, I'm clicking around so much here. There we go. We're registering a plugin. And one key piece here is register plugin in this context is not registering a WordPress plugin. It is registering a plugin for the editor. This is actually pretty similar to how you would register a plugin for like the classic editor, like the Tiny MCE registering plugin. Anybody's ever done that before? This is very similar. You're registering a plugin for the block editor. And what it's doing in its rendering, it's adding this slot, and then inside of that slot, it's adding our MetaBox field component. Now, this is using some core WordPress components that you may or may not be familiar with, but all it's doing is adding a text control field, and it's basically using this use entity prop to set the meta, post meta. Now, again, I'm sure a lot of this is foreign to many of you, but really all we're doing is we're rendering a text field, and we have a way of allowing the user to update that text field and saving it to post. Let's take it one step further. We're going to go back to our block development examples repository. And there's another example that I actually added recently. It's called it's aptly named the post meta modal. So let's go take a look and see what this one does. So in our previous example, we didn't have a whole lot of, one of the biggest complaints around this approach is that you have this really narrow space to add content. So a lot of meta boxes, especially for custom big plugins, use that whole real estate down here to add a whole bunch of stuff. And when you're constrained to this little narrow section, it can be challenging to fit all that content that you previously had in a meta box into the sidebar. So in this little example, what I'm doing is I'm using a modal to handle this content. Now, we're gonna remove from this discussion the discussion around modals. Like, some people like them, some people don't. There are some accessibility questions around modals. I believe the modal that's built into WordPress, the WordPress core component that is a modal, is quite accessible. I'm sure there's opportunities for improvement there. But the benefit of the example that I'm going to show you in a minute is it is using all WordPress components. So when I open up, for example, the preferences panel, this one right here, it's using the exact same component that I'm going to show you in a second. So any improvement that WordPress gets with regards to modals or whatever, to improve accessibility, to improve how modals work, your plugin or your extension will automatically inherit that because you're already using WordPress components. So let's take a look at the example that I've built out. This one here, yeah. Okay, so now you don't really see that plus sign anymore. Or sorry, not the plus sign, the little plugin sign anymore. But here we have, under plugins, we have an option for manage post meta. And when the user clicks on this, they get a little modal. And we have a text field, we have an options, and we have a select, a radio and a select. The cool thing about this is I've also built in a command palette command. So if we have post meta, you can see that they start typing in meta and they have the option to jump into that modal and they can manage those changes. So we go like this, test A, C. Now when we update, we can see if we go back and just confirm that this is actually being saved and updated, we can go to general, custom, save and reload, and we can see that we have that custom post meta that I registered for that little example, A, B, C, and test, which is exactly what we're seeing here. So this is a way, and there's a whole bunch of things you can do with the modal component. You can make it full width, you can make it small, and you can basically do whatever you want inside of this modal. So far I've shown you two examples. One very simple example where it's this, our little, we registered a little kind of plugin panel here where users can change things. I've also shown you the modal approach. Now, this is also using a slot. So if we go to look at the code here, this is very similar to the example before. This is using a different slot called plugin more menu item. So if we go back to our examples here, it's right here. This is the slot. And what this is doing is, it's, as the name suggests, it's adding a more menu item to this options panel. The unique thing that we've done here is what this menu item does is it has an on-click parameter that is opening and closing the modal. So that's all it's doing here is when you click it, it opens the modal, and we have our modal component here. All of these components, every single one of them, are all WordPress components. So if you look at all my imports here, I'm importing a modal, radio control, select control, text control. So I didn't have to build anything custom whatsoever other than wire up these components to work within that more menu item slot. And then if we look down here, we're doing the exact same thing. We're registering a custom plugin for the block editor, and we're passing this component. So I know that was a lot. I'm going to stop right there. Ryan, do we have any pertinent questions we want to answer before moving on to your examples?
There's a few. Some of the questions come around like UI decisions, I think. David Carr is saying things multiple sidebars become confusing fast. Document versus block properties are complex enough for users, then those options disappear when a custom sidebar is active. I think that's a valid concern. I think I kind of answered the question, but I mean, if you want to throw an answer in there too, I think it comes down to what you're building and where it makes most sense for it to appear. It's not like it either has to go at the bottom of the page or it has to go in the plugin sidebar area. There's all alternate approaches, and I can kind of demonstrate that when it gets to my turn to demo. Scott Kingsley Clark's got some questions in there. One that he did have was, is the plugin the plugin sidebar button, is it as accessible as in the sense of like accessibility? Is it as accessible as what a typical meta box has? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm going to look it up, but I didn't know if you knew off the top of your head if there was any accessibility issues around there. I don't think there is, but
I do not know specifically. However,
okay,
everything that we're showing today is utilizing core editor functionality. So everything that we're building is not something unique to what already exists in the editor. So if there are accessibility concerns with certain panels or modals or whatever, that is inherently a WordPress problem that so that sounds bad, right? But it's actually great, because if those are reported and fixed, you are using core WordPress components. So whenever they are fixed in core, they will be fixed in your plugin or extension. So that's kind of the benefits of using kind of the native editor components, because there's a strong commitment to accessibility, and yes, there may be problems, but when those are fixed in core, they will be inherently fixed so long as you're using the core WordPress components. This little example right here, like the plugin seed manage post meta, this opens like this. If we go over to the site editor and we come here, see the settings and styles, these buttons here. These are being implemented the exact same way. So the button that I created, this is core that allows you to switch between the two. These are implemented the exact same way as the example I did. So I think that's a cop-out answer, in that there may be accessibility issues throughout WordPress. I mean, but so long as you're staying as close to core as possible, then you can rely on core getting better, which will inherently make your own work better.
That's a fantastic point. Wow, don't reinvent the wheel if you can help it.
Yeah, actually, and while we're here, I think
there's one more question,
Nick,
that I just wanted to jump in before we change topics. Pat Ramsey asked, it's a two-parter. I love that this is being studied, but reading the GitHub comments and listening to this presentation, I have two questions. One, first, did I hear correctly that the issue seems to boil down to scrolling versus modal? If so, why is scrolling bad? It's the native method for browsing long content, requires no code to implement, no controls to interact with, and is device independent or be in danger of over engineering something. I don't think it's a question of scrolling versus modal. I think that's a side effect of what is going to happen. I think, Nick, I think you're more well versed in the nitty gritty of this issue. Maybe you can respond to that. But
Yeah, I think that there's some. So what this PR is doing is that it's assuming that nobody moves away from meta boxes, or at least is trying to handle meta boxes as they stand today. If you have a plugin or a project that's built out using meta boxes, like converting away from meta boxes is going to require time and development, right? And it's going to probably be a big barrier for a lot of folks. So the goal here is to how do we isolate meta boxes in a place such that it doesn't negatively impact the editor, but people can still use meta boxes. So that's what this PR is about. And I think that you're right. There are some questions around like, okay, where do we put these meta boxes that currently exist? Does it, how does scrolling work? Where do we put them? There's an entire conversation around like, where do we put existing meta boxes? And and I think that people should read through this PR and add their feedback if you currently have a meta box or rely on a meta box for your work. What we are trying to discuss today is that's kind of a separate issue. So that basically is trying to maintain functionality with meta boxes. Our discussion today is like, okay, well, if you have the time and energy to explore alternative options to meta boxes, what would that look like? So I don't have too many thoughts on the PR per se, because I don't have any meta boxes, but I do think that the bigger discussion, the long-term discussion is, okay, if I am going to move away from meta boxes, so I don't like this user experience and I want to improve the user experience, how do I move away from that? What are the additional options that I can choose? And I think getting back to your point around how should I do it? Because meta boxes are really straightforward. There's one place, that's where you put your meta box. And what we're going to be presenting today is a lot of different options. And I think that level of creativity is great, but it also it spawns a lot of questions. It's like, well, where should I put it? And I think that that's something that is a downside and a benefit of the editor, because you can really put things where it makes sense for your users. And I think that this, unless there's a few more questions, I think this is a perfect opportunity to switch over to you, Ryan, because some of your examples are really cool, where you've integrated these meta fields in places that feel really intuitive for the user.
Cool. Yeah. I'm going to jump into that, but there is just a follow-up question that I think I might be able to answer. So Pat Ramsey, you answered the first part. The second part was, it seems that this assumes all pages are block editor friendly. I think it's safe to say that most pages are, but when it comes to products or content that does not fit with that assumption, content that is largely data driven, that requires essentially custom fields to build. It's an excellent point. And I don't have a demo of this, but for those type of products, like historically, pre-Gutenberg, we only had post types and we only had meta boxes to store data. Like if it didn't fit into a taxonomy somewhere, you had to add a meta field to be able to add that custom item. So if, like, for a product page, you have a title, you have a description of that product, and then you've got a million fields that you want to keep. So you had to use post meta for that. So the interface became like a title, a small description, and a million meta boxes. And that's a totally valid concern, that not all post types and content fit into this is a blog, I'm going to read that. So there are tools available to sort of we're not saying you can't do what you want to do. That's not what we're saying. We're saying here are some other ways that you could do it that might look a little nicer, that might be less input field. Like I was trying to see if I could put a demo of this together, but I just didn't have the time. But like the new data views stuff, the stuff that's being done with data views, that's going to be amazing, in the sense of maybe instead of like it loading a page, it loads a data view that is a table view of all your meta fields that you need to update for that particular product. Like that's a pretty cool UI that kind of fits what you're trying to do a little bit better than what the standard UI that we've had since WordPress got meta fields had, right? So
yeah, let me see if I can quickly demo that. So sure. I want to stress that we are talking about post types that haven't the block editor enabled. You know, like you said, like the commenter said, there's tons of like products or, you know, things that are still using the classic editor that do not use block editor, that are basically all meta boxes. We're not saying that meta boxes should go away completely. We're saying, like, how do we improve it in the editor? And I just want to touch on Ryan's point around the data views, because the data views is, I mean, this is being built out. It is not currently extensible, but it will be in the future. But if we look at the site editor, we can start to see some of how this works. Actually, do I have Gutenberg installed? No, I don't. Sorry, I need to install Gutenberg to get the latest and greatest here. But I just want to quickly show this if anybody has not seen it. Oh, I know why. I'm using Playground and it's trying to load the blueprint that I had for the example, which we actually don't need in this example. All right, so now we can load Gutenberg. So this is actually a quick spotlight around what's coming in 6.6. So for anybody who's not up to date on what's coming in WordPress 6.6, this should be interesting. So sorry for a little bit of a deviation. Well, what
I can sorry, just while that's installing, I can there's some more questions and stuff. I think a lot of what people are saying, and if I'm trivializing it, that's not my intent, or like I'm just trying to condense it, is that there's a lot of concerns around the UI getting like bloated. Like, what if we put everything into a plugin sidebar? Like, you know, what does that look like? How does that work? And I think maybe it makes sense for me to show some of the things that we're doing, and but let's definitely look at these data views, because they are very cool.
Yeah, so
options are amazing. So
yeah, so this is pretty cool. So the way that this works is, if we're in the site editor now, and we can start to see that we have content here for pages, and we can start editing things for pages. And you could imagine in the future where in the site editor you had a panel for WooCommerce, right? Or easy digital downloads, or name your plugin that adds content. And there could be a system, an extensible system, where you could add those fields within this view, where somebody can come in, add a new product. They can, all those fields there are inside the site editor, not inside of a meta box. And, you know, everything would be done contained in here. This is future stuff, so I don't want to get us too distracted by this, but the data views project is going to unlock a lot of things. And I think that, and also the admin redesign, which is, again, way in the future. But these are the kind of the reasons why we're talking about this now, because meta boxes do not natively fit into the site editor, post editor, really. So how do we start thinking about alternative solutions? So let me kick it over to you, Ryan. I don't want to hold this up anymore, because your examples are pretty good and answer a lot of the questions.
Cool. All right, let me just share my screen. Let me know. Here's the button. I think, is that the button? Oh, hold on. Let's try that again. All right, let me know. I should be sharing my screen.
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Okay, cool. So this is just a demo that I put together. So I have a very contrived concept of a guest author, which is something that lots of publishers do. This could be literally anything. But so, and I wanted to save 4 pieces of post meta: the name, the email, my birthday, why not, and a favorite color. So I've defined these as regular old post meta, and I just wanted to show that. So I'm gonna actually turn the panel off because we don't need it for this. Oh, I actually have to press a button to make that happen. It's my first day with WordPress. So sorry about that. Hide and reload. Okay, so my first question to you is, do you even need a meta box? That's the first question. When I first started working with blocks, there was a lot of like, do we even need to save it as post meta? Is one. 2, like, do you need a meta box? So in to do a basic replacement of what we just saw, you could do something like this, which is just a series of input fields, which is super boring, but works, gets the job done. That took me about 5 minutes to put together. And I think sorry, I lost my something in chat caught my eye there. So this is the most basic way of doing this. In my opinion, we're using a slot fill here. That this is the document setting panel, a slot. And if we update this stuff, you can see that I'm actually updating it all in here. And that's a really big benefit of doing it inside the block editor, is that once you're working inside the block editor or the site editor, you kind of have everything talking to everything. So this is the UI, which is handled on the post level, but I also have a custom block that I've made, and this custom block is it just handles post meta. So what I'm going to be able to do with this is save my name and my email address, and it's going to generate my avatar and all that stuff. But again, this is just writing to post meta. So we need to start thinking, I think, of like, we need to do we even need to save this information? If you're not querying it, then you probably don't need to save it as post meta. It's just prior to Gutenberg, that's the only place where we could store that extra data was in post meta. So that's, yeah. So this is my block version of that. This is the basic UI version of that. So I could even just delete this block. We don't even need it in here, but I have my basic UI. I have a drop-down component. So this is a component that is available to us. There's an entire list of components that are being converted from experimental to stable. Now, this is the issue. Now, all of these components are being sort of, they're being reviewed to make sure that it does make sense for them to become stable, because there is a different way of privatizing stuff now where you don't, things that shouldn't be exposed are not exposed. These components have been exposed as experimental for a while. So the ones that I'm going to show you are probably the safest to use, in the sense of like they're already used in core. So they're probably just going to take the experimental off, and then the component will just work. I'm totally confident in using these personally. I'm going to be using them in my AQL plugin, which has a whole ton of interface stuff, and it's going to make it nice and clean. So the first one is called the drop-down component, which is right here. And this is just like a couple ones that are available. But what this allows me to do is I want to show my guest author information. So I pop that open. Now I've got a tabbed interface, which is so much cleaner than this, right? So I can put in my name, I can change my birthday, I can do my favorite color, which is apparently whatever color that is. I'm colorblind, so I don't know. But this is all handled with core components. So there's nothing in here that I've written that's custom. There's nothing in there. So that's one pretty fun way of doing it, right? So you can see how you could pack a ton of information into this particular thing. This tools panel one is another one that you've probably seen before. It doesn't fit so well in this particular slot. And this kind of gets back to, whose question was that? It was, sorry. I'm just going to scroll back for a second. David Carr, I think about, if it all goes in one place, it's going to look weird. And this is a good point. Like this one may not fit in there, but I also have all these same controls in a little sidebar, plugin sidebar, and it works really well in here. It looks really nice. So we can toggle all that stuff off. Same with this, right? There isn't a GitHub repo yet, but I will be pushing this stuff up soon, and we'll put a link on in the comments of the meetup. And yeah, so that's sorry, I lost my thing here. So yeah, and so the last sort of area that I wanted to show is what we're talking about here is stuff related to this particular post. So probably so I wanted to put it in a place that made the most sense. So I want to show my guest author information here. And so I just used a different slot. This is the plugin post status slot, and it is got the exact same information, but it's in a place that makes a lot more sense. It doesn't have to all go up here. In fact, it probably wouldn't make sense to go up here in this particular case. If this was something else, yeah, sure. But right now, I wanted to put this in here, and this all works. Blah 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 blah. It saves, nice and simple. I feel like I've missed something. And let's take a look at this. We can open this and we can see that name, that change that I made works fine. And so there's a lot of possibilities here as to where we can put things that make it feel more intuitive. In the block itself, what do I call it thing? Post meta block, I've got sidebar controls. So inside my block, I've got this set up in using the regular inspector controls that you would with a custom block to put stuff in this sidebar. I've got all this working, and it's updating here. It updates here. It does everything. If I change this, this is actually pulling in Gravatar. So one really cool thing about this is that in this case, if I wanted to show my avatar, doing this in a meta box is going to be super hard to do, because it's going to be yes, all blocks can be limited to a specific, can they? I think you can do that. I think you have to do some gymnastics to make it work, but you can do that. You could have it, it's a good question. I think you can check it in the render and stuff like that. Yeah. So I wanted to have this show my avatar, after I changed my email address. So that's done. So that's going to be really hard to do in a standard meta box. So moving into the block editor, into the Gutenberg world is going to allow you to have a lot more integration. I saw someone talking about block bindings, which is absolutely tied to post meta, or can be. Right now, I don't believe it. You can edit it directly inside of here. I think there's a way. I think there's a way of doing that. I think it's in Justin's article for sure.
Yeah, I'll find Justin's
article. Show H. Okay, so FlexSeth is asking, is there a keyboard shortcut to show and hide the post meta boxes? I don't think there is. There isn't. Is there? Post meta? No, there's nothing in there. But you can. Let's check references. I don't think there is, because it does require like a save and a reload. I did do one in my stream where I just stole the code that they worked to add a command palette thing. But Django Doucette wants to see the HTML. Okay, we can do that. Code editor. So this is a custom block that I wrote, so there's not much in there.
Yeah, so and it's a dynamic block, so everything
Yeah.
is rendered on the front end. So
Yeah.
you're not going to see
there's no attributes. So because everything is being saved to post meta, it doesn't actually have any attributes. I can kind of show you what the code looks like, if you'd like. There's a lot going on here. So like in my edit, that doesn't really help too much. But in the render, what you would do is you would do something like this. So I don't know if you can see that. Maybe I should zoom it in. What you would do is you would retrieve all the post meta for all the things that you'd want, and then I'm just conditionally displaying them. Please excuse this PHP. I wrote it about 3 seconds ago, and I probably want to do some more checking and stuff in there, add some defaults and stuff like that. So yeah.
I don't want to touch on the fact. So Derek's asking the question, like, so if I wanted to include this block in a template, what would that look like? And it's actually very straightforward, because the block is saving post meta. So if you can go back to the code editor real quick in the editor.
Yeah.
So that right there is all you would include inside of your template. So
yes.
you'd place that in your template, and then wherever that occurred, what it would do is it would fetch in Ryan's render function, it would fetch the post meta that's been applied to it and render that out.
Yep, that's it. It's fairly straightforward. In your template, just if you were putting this on a single page, for example, you wouldn't see any post meta, because obviously when you're in the template, it has no context of post type or what it's looking at. But when that renders, it would work. Now you can do some things in the block editor side to kind of like add some default whatever you want to do, but yeah, but that's all you would have to do, I think. So
I'll go for it, Ryan.
No, that was I don't know what to say next. So
yeah, no, I think that's kind of an important thing. So we showed how to save post meta, right? And in various ways, but what Ryan's showing here is kind of that next step, because a lot of times in like the classic editor, for example, let's say you wanted to render this guest author piece, you wouldn't see that, right? It'd be maybe a short code or something like that, or the template would render it. But this way, you can not only can you create custom UI for what would previously be Metabox content, you can also create custom blocks or use block bindings. Again, I said I would find that article, and I have not, but here we go. To bring that post meta into the editor, which I think is kind of like putting the whole picture together. You have a more native UI for folks to change this post meta. And then you combine that with blocks, custom blocks, or block bindings that then present that post meta natively inside of the editor for people. So it's like more like a one-to-one to what you can see. So sorry, I keep saying I'm going to post this, but here's the link to Justin Tadlock's latest article on block bindings, and combining it with block variations, which is really, really interesting and very cool. So
one more thing that I just want to show is if with the old way of doing it, you would have a post meta saved, then you would in your template you would define where that comes out. When you put it inside of a block, even if you have a block that literally its whole job is to just retrieve the post meta and display it, you can do this. Now I want that. Now that's going to appear underneath this particular thing. You have much more flexibility, or the user has much more flexibility to make a change. And that was always a code level change. I mean, I know things have changed since pre 5.0, but it's something to consider, that this kind of flexibility is really nice, because then you can have patterns that are nested inside of patterns. You can do things, you can do all kinds of things when you're not tied to that meta box, and that's the only place where that goes. So again, we're not trying to replace meta boxes. This is just an alternative way of retrieving and storing that same information that could very well be in a meta box as well. But I just think that there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of options. It does require a little bit of like maybe rethinking of, like, we always kind of thought, oh, that's post meta, we're just going to put it in the post meta bucket. Well, maybe it doesn't need to be post meta, is the first question, right? And so just kind of rethinking the approach and seeing what tools are really available. Because I mean, for me, this is like doing this is a much more compelling way of managing this stuff, right? Because then the user doesn't have to worry about, well, what's the date format that I want to use, and my favorite color, is that a string? Like, do I put blue in there, or do I put a hex, or do I put RGBA? Like, what do I put in there? This just handles it all, right? So you don't have to worry about that stuff. Anyways, that's that. I'll get off my sandbox now, but that's kind of my my spiel on that. So
yeah, and I think that one of the things that, obviously Ryan and I work very closely with Core, so we're not talking specifically about any third-party plugins or anything like that. So there are a lot of very viable solutions out there for, whether ACF or pods or whatever. So we're not talking about any of that.
Nope.
But one of the things that I think is quite compelling, especially when you don't need a lot of post meta. Once we start getting to the discussion around, like, okay, I have a product post type and the whole thing is meta boxes, that's part of the discussion, but it's a bit of a separate discussion. What we're talking about here as maybe a small step in terms of migrating away from meta boxes is how, for small things like what we have here, this guest author, how do we incorporate that more natively into the editor? And I also want to, this because somewhat related, is Ryan's block here. No offense, Ryan, but it's very basic.
Yes, it is.
Basic
means garbage. Yeah, no, it's not good.
No, but you could make it better in the sense where right now, like, if you click on the block, all those settings are set in the sidebar, right? Well, you could set it up so, and those are rich text fields in the block itself. And when someone typed, it's saved to post meta, or when they enter their okay, it's already doing that, so sorry, but like,
well, yeah, but that's the point, right?
Yeah, you wouldn't have it on the side. So a user would come here, they'd fill out the feed, they fill out the block, and you could also wrap this in a pattern, and it would all just get kind of behind the scenes. It would just get saved, and it all kind of work. So
if I was going to build this for a client or for like a real use case, I wouldn't use the sidebar at all. There's no point, because if this needs to be saved as post meta, I can do that. You can do that with like, I can show you the line of code that does that. It looks like this. So this line of code right here is what's going to retrieve the post meta, and it also gives you a function to set the post meta. So for the one line of effort, well, I guess 2 lines of effort, that to do that, it's not worth the all of this extra stuff. This, in my inspector controls, and then when I look inside this component, there's like 100 lines inside of that component. I don't need to do that. You can do that. Nothing wrong with doing that. But in my opinion, if this is something that's going to be displayed on the front end as a block, but it still needs to be post meta, I'm going to use it in the block editor, and it's going to just save the post meta instead of the block attribute. That's going to make it so much more seamless, and you can style it however it needs to be styled. Like, obviously this is not production ready, but like, so yes, to Nick's point, like you can do it here, you can do it here, you can do it up here, you can do it in a number of places, but I think we need to think about where it makes the most sense and what you want to do with it. Like, yeah.
And I think the hardest part, right, is what makes the most sense, right? Because that's going to be different for everybody. It's going to be different for every client build you do. And part of our job, Brian and I's, is to try and create more examples, try and provide more thing. I mean, we all copy and paste, right? Like we all want to find examples that roughly match what we're trying to build and then iterate on those. So I think that part of our goal with like the block development examples repository is to continue build out examples that folks that solve real world use cases or present examples of real world use cases that people can then take and apply on their own projects. So unfortunately, it's not just a single meta box that you dump stuff into. There's a lot of different ways you can incorporate this post meta. And so part of the discussion today is to, one, showcase some examples, but then also hopefully hear from you today, or feel free to DM us or contact us on WordPress Slack or whatever after the fact to be like, hey, I'm really trying to do this. These are the blockers that I'm facing. I can't quite figure out how I want to incorporate it into the editor. And we have a discussion about it because we don't necessarily have all the answers either. But as kind of WordPress transitions over the next couple of years, it is something that's going to have to be solved for all WordPress developers who are using meta boxes. And so our job is to try to help with that transition in any way we can. So we're not saying meta boxes are evil, never use meta boxes. It's more about like, okay, well, how can we translate to a more kind of integrated, user-friendly approach in certain situations? Couple questions in here. Is there an easy way to delete or clear post meta when a block is deleted or removed from the page? This is something you could integrate. You could handle it when it, and that's the thing, and that's kind of gets back to the point, right? And maybe this is a good example we need to show. Like, there isn't a one way of doing things. So a lot of these questions are, can we do this? The answer is yes. It's just a matter of like putting together an example to show how you can do it. So it's definitely possible, Katie. We just don't have an example on hand right now for that.
Scott Carver, do we have an available slot after post, which would be great to see some examples of React to update metadata from the traditional meta box area? What do you mean, Scott? Do you mean after post as in like down here, or like after the post content? Is that what you mean? Because there's a post, yes, student being down here. No, there's not one down there that I'm aware of.
And I don't think that there ever will be. And the reason because
it
looks like prime real estate here, but if you have a page template or a built out page, that is actually where your footer lives. And so like having content below your footer, it's not like we all use WordPress forever. I mean, most people here probably use WordPress forever. So it's very natural to us that post meta is at the bottom. But if you're a new user, and I have a long page, why would that all be below? Like it isn't necessarily intuitive that it's all down there. So I think it's how do we elevate the important things much higher? Like a good example is a site editor here. Yeah.
And you could like, so if you're saying after content, you could be talking about like, so like between the footer and the actual content, which is like the, sorry, this is a bad example of this page, but let's look at the block home, I guess, or I don't know. Let's go to single posts. So like we have, the header and the footer, and then inside of here, we're gonna have the post content, the post meta that, you could put stuff in your template. And if it's post level, if it's post meta, you're talking about something on the post level anyways. So this might be a good spot for it. So you could put it between the footer and what is considered the content area. Because when we're in the block editor, we're really talking about, or sorry, the post editor, we're really talking about the content that appears kind of between the header and the footer.
Mhm.
And when we're talking about like where that sits in the context of the entire page, we should probably be in the site editor anyways. I think if I'm understanding your question, please let me know, but there wouldn't be a lot of point to have something slot available after the post content in the post editor, because you can just insert a block at the bottom and that would be technically after the post content. So I think it's how you think about it. But if you want that to be on every single template for a single, like an is singular is like a single post of whatever type, then you'd probably want to do that at the template level. And then you can put a block in there that accesses post meta. Hope that helps. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I think that we could probably also put together a bunch of examples on like custom blocks that like, and I think that maybe this is like an interesting one when if you're like building a theme, build a block theme that utilizes custom post meta, and then like have some custom blocks and block bindings that like incorporate that into the theme, like into the templates and whatnot. That might be a really cool thing to build out as a theme example, because it kind of like ties the room together. Like it's not just the block or the panel, it's that and a block theme and how you would integrate those different elements in different places. So
I love the idea of a block that cleans up post meta when it's removed. I think that's super neat. I think we could do it pretty well. Easy is maybe not the right word. I think we could do it. That'd be
or
interesting.
even just like a clear out or a prompt that says like clear post
Yeah,
meta.
you could probably just do it like and have it. You could have it return something like this is not going to work, but we could do something like this. Meta, and then we could just take all of our meta, put our object in there, something like, and then just be like, set it to nothing. This is
Yeah.
making it up because my GitHub Copilot's a better developer than I am. You can spread that. Oh, sorry. To do and then spread this object. Get out of here. Let's GitHub Copilot. You do something like this, maybe. Is that going to validate? No, that's broken. I broke it. But anyways, you guys get the idea of what I'm talking about here. So when use effect, when something unmounts, it allows you to return a function. So you could say when this edit component is unmounted, this is probably going to run way too many times and break. But that would be my first attempt. Would be just to clear it out.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
mean,
Live coding.
yeah, live coding is always dangerous. But I think that like once you're working in the editor and there's a lot of different ways that you can do things. It's just a matter of like doing it and then coming up with those examples. So we got about 5 more minutes and we'll obviously hang around for those 5 more minutes, but I really want to stress the point that we were hoping today to start this conversation. So if you're listening today and being like, this is a horrible idea, I hate this, like we want to hear that. And we want to hear what blockers you're encountering with this approach, or some of the approaches that we've shown today. Or if you want like more examples around like, okay, this looks interesting, I'm intrigued, but I needed to do this. We also want to hear that. One of the best places to share that information is in WordPress Slack. There's a channel called #outreach. And that's a great place to share your thoughts around meta boxes. I also encourage you to share your feedback on that pull request because, again, we're talking about two things. One, taking existing meta boxes and isolating them into a specific place in the editor, which has some technical benefits for the editor and in the progress of WordPress. And then the second one is how do we build alternatives to meta boxes? But if you have a plugin that uses a ton of meta boxes, and obviously that's going to take time for you to migrate away from, you still need it to work in WordPress. So I encourage you to leave feedback on that pull request for your own use cases and concerns you may have, whatever. But yeah, Brian and I are here, not telling you that meta boxes are horrible, but also trying to encourage folks to start trying to think about other ways of presenting meta. And our job is to try and help with that transition. So please let us know what we can do for that. The last thing that I wanted to stress is how interconnected everything is. We've done content on building custom blocks. We've done content on building editor extensions. We have tons of articles in the developer blog around block bindings and how that stuff works. What you'll find is that a lot of the methods of doing things are the same across these things. So if you built the block before and you've integrated inspector controls and used that slot, then you're going to start becoming more familiar with some of the slots that we showed off today. Similarly about getting post meta and saving post meta and getting, using WordPress components and all that kind of stuff. All of this builds on each other. So if there are things that you saw today using React and React components that's very foreign to you, I would encourage you not to get freaked out. And if you're looking for a place to start getting comfortable with these concepts and building for the editor, I would suggest checking out, there's a tutorial in the block editor handbook for building your first block. And it sounds like that's not related to what we're talking about today, but the core concepts around having a build process and integrating WordPress components, it's very related. Like the fundamental technical skills are fundamentally related to everything that we're showing in these examples. So if you've never done this stuff before, I encourage you to check out that tutorial, go through it, because that will give you the foundation to then go look at the block development examples repository and start incorporating some of those ideas into your own work. All right, a few more minutes. Any questions here?
There's a question, David Levine. I'm typing an answer, but I just wanted to call it out. He had a really great question about the meta value. Is meta value type safely handled by the store/REST API, or does it need to be handled manually by the block.js? It does not, in the sense of like when you register post meta, you still need to register post meta in the PHP. Are you still seeing my screen? I think you are.
Yep.
If so, I'm calling it here, and then what I should have done if I was doing this, for real, if I could type this, sanitize callback. Right. So that's going to be a function that is going to sanitize your stuff. So you're going to want to make sure that you're adding this stuff correctly. Right. Man. And then so return true, because all my stuff is valid. So you're going to want to do something like this. But for the most part, you don't need to manage that. Like you don't need to manage how the REST API handles it. What you should manage is the input from the user, in the sense of like you're asking for an email and they're putting in a number. That should probably not work, but that's a UI thing. But yeah, for the most part, it's safe. It's escaped. Everything's dealt with properly. But you still have to follow good WordPress sanitization and escaping policies, which you would normally anyways.
All right, Ryan, the next question's for you. When might we see the ability to query meta values in the core query block? I'm aware of Ryan's query plugin.
I don't know. I think we are. It's a good question. There is a lot of work being done towards what do they call it? It's fields? No, it's not called fields. I can't remember what it's called. There is an effort to make this work. But it's a big job. I'm just going to say that it's a big job. This has been something that people have been. Just ask Scott, how long have we been looking for meta fields and meta in core? Right, it's a long time. So I think I don't know. That's my answer, because I don't know. I'm not intimately aware of like where we stand with that. In the meantime, just use my plugin.
Exactly. This is a soft.
Such a bad, shameless self-promotion, right?
No, but I think that, there's a lot of plugins out there, and I have many of my own, and other people have theirs, where you're building on functionality that's not in core, but conceptually could be in core in the future. And so Ryan's plugin's a great example, where in the future, maybe functionality from it will be put into core. Maybe it'll look a little different in core, but it's a great opportunity to test out functionality and do it today rather than wait for core. So yeah, check out Ryan's plugin if you need that kind of functionality. All right, we're over time. Thank you everybody for attending today. And again, one last lead. If you have thoughts about meta boxes, if you have thoughts about how to do this stuff, if you have questions, please reach out to us. We really want to create a discussion around this topic and try to create some good solutions for folks. And finally, a couple announcements. Let me pull up my list here for my announcements to share. Is that WordPress 6.6 is going to be released on July 16th. That is the current timeline for that. So if you're interested in looking at what's coming in WordPress 6.6, I encourage you to check out the roadmap. I'm putting the link in the chat right now. And one of the things we always hear is that it's very challenging to keep up with what's happening with WordPress, especially from a developer perspective. So we say this pretty much every time we do one of these sessions, but we strongly encourage everybody to take 20 minutes and read this article series on the WordPress developer blog called What's New for Developers. It comes out every month on the 10th of the month, and it's a recap of the past month's work of highlights that have been happening in WordPress development specifically. So if you want to just take 20 minutes a month and catch up on what's happening, I strongly encourage you to take a peek at that article. A lot of new features and functionality that are, important to developers, especially with things that are coming in the new release, will be mentioned there. And then a shameless pitch for the WordPress developer blog. It's all maintained by WordPress contributors, and it's a great resource for anything developer related. So in that vein, if you like to see content about meta boxes and alternative methods, there definitely could be an article there as well. So thank you everybody for attending today. Again, Ryan and I are both available on X, Twitter, WordPress, Slack, wherever. And we hope to hear from you around meta boxes.